Hey, Bill.
Hey.
There's a zebra behind you. Welcome to the PastorCast.
Skittle-a-do, I said, bim, bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim. Skittle-a-do, I said, skid out and bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim, bop, boom. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim, bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim. Skittle-a-do, I said, skid out and bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim, bop, boom.
All right, welcome everybody. Why are there animals behind us?
Well, it was Fall Festival weekend, and these were in your station, right?
Yeah, we had the Noah's Ark station, and so this came out of my station. The animals came in 2 by 2,
Nice.
according to the story, and so we just brought them to the set today because we're celebrating. What a tremendous weekend we had.
Yeah, best yet, and we've got a little highlight reel for you to look at, just in case you missed it. Well, man, that video really captured the weekend well, and we want to especially thank everyone who volunteered their time to make this happen. And of course, our children's ministry director, Sarah, and her assistant, Heather, who worked countless hours to make this community outreach a big success.
That was great, and a lot of people helped out. For everyone who came, who helped out, who just attended, I hope you had a great time, and thanks for helping.
Well, Scott, it's time to move on to our main segment for the day, which I'm very excited about as we continue discussing worship. Now, this is our third part, and just to review, in part one, we talked about what is worship. We said, man, it's really hard to define worship because you can mean so many different things with the same word. It could be this all-of-life orientation of living our lives to serve God. It could be maybe just our private act of praising God, or it could be what we do specifically in churches on Sundays. Now, week 2, last week, we talked about what happens in churches on Sundays, and specifically, just it's an interesting observation that if you go from one church to the next, one context to the next, it looks very, very different. It's very diverse Christian worship, especially with regard to music. And so today in part 3, we're just going to expand on that a little bit and talk about music.
I'm excited. Let's get started. Really excited about the topic for tonight. Music is so important to worship, and we're just going to ask a really important question. Why music? I mean, what is it? What's it all about? Why is music employed in Christian worship?
Yeah, well, a good starting point is because Scripture commands it. So in Psalm 95, for instance, we read, "Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation." And so if for no other reason, because the Bible clearly commands us, not just to speak about how great God is, but to sing. Now, why would we think that is? We're going to explore that a little bit today.
Yeah, that's great. So, let's just start with a basic question. What is music, kind of at its core?
Yeah, I'm actually a big nerd when it comes to this question, so I'm looking forward to this discussion. What is music? I think you have to go one level higher first and ask a more fundamental question. What is sound?
Okay.
Music is made of sounds, right? So what is sound? Sound is basically compressed air. It's positive and negative fluctuations of air pressure. So when I clap my hand, it compresses air, which travels to your eardrum. Anyway, air can be compressed at different rates, and if it ends up being graphed out like this, positive and negative. If the air waves move roughly 110 times per second, that sounds to us like the note A.
Really?
It's really, really interesting. Yeah, and so basically, music is very mathematical. If you look at this chart here, you're going to see what I'm talking about. If we pluck a string on this cello, or an acoustic guitar, or a piano, any instrument, you're going to get a note. Let's say it's A. So the string is going to vibrate 110 times per second. What's really interesting is if you divide that string length exactly in half and then pluck it, you're going to hear twice that. You're going to hear 220 vibrations per second, which to our ear, the way God made us, doesn't sound arbitrary, but it sounds like that same note one octave up.
Huh. That's interesting.
Now, all the notes on our scale in the notes we use to make music are actually mathematically based. And so if we divide that string again and we do it 3 times, 330 hertz, that sounds to our ear like a perfect fifth, the note E. And if we do that with the division of 5, then it sounds like the major third. And we can get into this. I could waste a lot of time. I'm sure people are not as nerdy about this as I am.
I wouldn't have said it, except that you did. You really are a nerd.
Yes. but it's really interesting. If you look at all the notes in our scale, they're not arbitrary, but they are mathematical ratios. And I just find that's really interesting that God made us in a way where there's beauty in nature, there's mathematical formulas that determine what a flower looks like, and but it's in our ears too.
That is an amazing part of the creation.
Yes, so pitch is not arbitrary, and neither is rhythm. You look at songs, they're divided into sections that are usually 4 to 8 measures long, and within measures you've got beats, usually like 4 beats per measure, and within the beats you've got notes. You're going to have 4 notes per beat, and it's just very mathematical. And it sounds to our ear like something that's more than just math. That's more than just, oh, that's interesting. That's 16 notes per measure. That's a 16th note. But you feel something when you hear this math.
Yeah, there's something emotional about it. You're talking about math, but there's something beautiful. There's something emotional. Music tends to move us.
Yeah.
Why does music move us?
Well, that's a mystery, actually. And I think that's one of the best things that points to the existence of God, actually. Because in my mind, there's no reason why when you hear a sad song you should feel sad, or why a certain chord, a minor chord, should feel sad. It just is that way. But it's true that music moves us. And think about, for instance, Phantom of the Opera. It's playing at the Broward Center right now, and Jess and I drove down there to see it. One of my favorite musicals of all time. And think about how music is used in this or other musicals. I like to think of it like this, that even if you didn't speak English, if you were a person who did not understand any of the lines being spoken in that musical, you could just listen to the music and understand what was going on, because music itself has a language for us.
So music speaks?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think about the Little Mermaid, for instance, and the happy song, da 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 da. I don't want to sing it because then Facebook will kick us offline. We found out that the hard way. But yeah, I mean, different songs say different things. And so it's really interesting. You can actually look up on YouTube to watch a movie without its score, without its soundtrack. I think it's Jurassic Park. I'm going to try to type that into the comments if I can find it. I recommend you do that because you don't realize how important music is to the movies we watch. I mean, you watch Jurassic Park without the musical score and it just is absurd. It's just wild. And think with me about The Little Mermaid or Phantom of the Opera. Think about how crazy it would be if you took the love song from that musical, let's go back to Phantom, when Christine is falling in love, but instead of that love song, you hear da 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 da. You know, you hear the horror title song. Or think about when she's visiting her father's grave and she's mourning, but instead you hear the upbeat song from Masquerade, da da da. You know, there's something about music that totally detached from the words, the music itself communicates something. Music speaks to us, and I just find that really interesting. It's universal. It's built into us. It's something that God has.
That is really fascinating. If you just think here, it's just a bunch of mathematical, ratios, and yet there's a language to it all.
Yeah, and there's some benefits to it. Music unites us. Check out Exodus 15. This is a worship song from the Bible. And Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and rider, he is hurled into the sea. And it goes on and on. It's kind of a weird worship song, right?
Yeah.
We don't sing worship songs about people being hurled into the sea. But what Israel did is they used music to unite them together and to help them remember their history. And so they would encode their shared history as a nation into songs because it's easy to memorize songs. I mean, I think about when I was in school, in elementary school, I can still sing those songs word for word. And I didn't have to work hard at memorizing them. It's just music has that cool ability, again, that God has put in us that allows music to act like a glue to like cement things into our memory. And so that's what Israel used worship songs for, is they would use those songs to help them come together as a nation and remember what God had done for them.
Now, I'm a baseball fan, so a great illustration of this is the Chicago Cubs, who are my favorite team. When they win at home, they always play this song, Go Cubs Go. And man, it unites Cubs fans. So that's a good illustration of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, music can unite us. It does in church as well when we're all singing the same thing.
Yeah.
And it encourages us. This is a universal human phenomena here that, when we come together to celebrate someone's birthday, we don't like shout at them in a monotone, "Happy birthday to you." That was super weird. Sorry about that. It's creepy.
Your nerd meter is going up in this episode.
That's creepier than that gorilla looking over your shoulder. But anyway, we don't do that. We don't sing and we don't shout monotone. We sing to encourage people and to bring cheer and joy into, like, for instance, a birthday celebration. So music has a lot of functions. It helps memorize, it helps unite, it helps encourage.
Let's talk about that.
Moves us.
Memorize one, because I think that's an important one too. I think memorization happens so much better with music than any other way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of benefit to using music, and I think that's why God has commanded that the church not just gather for this intellectual time of lecturing and responding, but actually to have music that goes above and beyond what words can say alone.
To me, one of the best ways to memorize Scripture is when you hear it set to music. Then you really know it. I think, as an example, there's several Psalms that I know, not because I memorized them with the words, but because I heard them set to music. Listen to that 3 or 4 times. Next thing you knew, I knew the whole thing.
Yeah, so let's talk finally about what this looks like in our church here at Sunlight.
Okay.
How do we apply all of this? We talked earlier about how music speaks, and we talked about how words speak. And so one of the ways we apply this in our church is that we want the words of the song to be congruent with the music of the song, knowing that both are speaking. And so we have various types of songs. In the act of worship, we have different things that we want to say to God. We can come before God repentant and and seeking forgiveness. And that's going to need a different kind of music than when we come before God joyful and celebratory. We want passionate music that feels driving and full of volume and excitement, but we also need songs that are tender and loving, more like love song kind of songs. And so one of our goals at Sunlight is to find congruence between the words the language we need to bring before God in worship, and the music that supports what we're saying to God in worship.
Now, music itself is just so diverse as well, though. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about music. And so, you know, there's one way in which we need all that diversity, which you're just mentioning, but there's another way in which too much diversity, I think, might even become a distraction. What do you think about that?
Well, that's one reason that we've picked as our primary genre, pop music. Because within the genre of pop, you have the ability to have a tender love song, a driving, passionate song, a sad song, and you have this voice that's not schizophrenic, but is all tied together in this style of music like what people are used to hearing on the radio, which, by the way, is a great side benefit because it's accessible. People are used to singing melodies like they hear on the radio. And so when we come together, that's part of how we can be united, memorize, and all the other things we've talked about. And that's one of the reasons we've chosen pop music as our primary style driver, as opposed to, for instance, a high culture, high church kind of thing, or a more folk kind of thing. I know you have some views about that. What do you think about that?
Well, this is just born out of time on the mission field. Of course, as we go on the mission field, you'll find that music in one culture is really different than music in another culture. And so it seems that from culture to culture, music speaks, you know, different styles of music speak to different cultures. And so this is interesting. Within any culture, there tends to be three cultures. There's a high culture, there's a pop culture, and there's a folk culture. So in American culture, like, we do have a high culture. It tends to be kind of a classical music or something that's a little bit more intellectual or elevated. We also have a folk culture. You could think of like country music or bluegrass. The third culture is sort of the in-between. It bridges, which is a pop culture. And, you know, it'd be appropriate that there might be some churches that are, you know, high music culture, and there'd be some churches that are low music culture. So there are churches that, you know, use elevated classical style music, and there are churches that use a kind of the folk style, a bluegrass style. These would be like the gospel churches. But if you want the broadest appeal, pop music tends to have, and the pop culture tends to have the broadest appeal. And it tends to be that those who are part of the high culture will listen to pop culture, but not folk culture. Those who are part of folk culture will listen to pop culture, but not generally high culture. And so it does have the broadest appeal. And yeah, that is one of the reasons why, you know, when it comes to musical style selection from among those three cultures within any one culture, if you really want to have a broad mission appeal, probably the pop culture and the music that's associated with it is a very good choice.
Yeah, well, that is part of how we're missional with our selection of worship style, and a lot of thought has gone into it. We look to the Bible for our guidance, as always, and just a few closing verses that I wanted to bring on the screen here. Psalm 96 says, "Sing to the Lord a new song, sing to the Lord all the earth." And Psalm 98 talks about making music to the Lord with all these instruments, with the harp and with the trumpets and the ram's horn. And, you know, worship in Scripture even is diverse. And worship in Scripture is loud and celebratory and full body experience and creative. And we're just kind of continuing. Our goal is to continue in that vein and what the Lord has commanded us to do. So to review what we've talked about, I mean, the Lord does command us to sing, which, by the way, I used to have a problem with when I was growing up because I didn't like to sing. That's weird for a worship leader.
Well, you know what? I think actually a lot of people will have that. And there's not, in our culture today, there's just not a lot of places where people sing and make music.
Yeah.
The church is really a special place because music is awesome. And so, yeah, there may be any number of people who are watching this who feel like you once felt. But I guess the encouragement, of course, is that you can come to love it so much that you make it your profession.
That's right. And it was through discovering the heart language. You know, I grew up in a church that didn't speak my heart language of music. And so it's through finding those songs that I could really latch on to.
Okay.
And that's our goal for people too. So yeah, I mean, what an interesting discussion. Sound, my vocal cords vibrating at a certain number of times per second, going through the air to your eardrum, which vibrates at that same number of times per second, which your brain perceives and somehow creates a feeling, an emotion, an experience that goes beyond what words can make. It's one of the greatest things about how God created us, I think. It's just really, really cool.
This has been a
It blows my mind.
Fascinating discussion.
I hope it blowed somebody else's mind. I hope I'm not the only nerd in here. But we would love to hear your questions and comments. And yeah, just continue this discussion, especially anything that you would like us to discuss on our next episode as we continue on to week 4.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for joining us tonight. Leave your comments and questions. Share this video if it was helpful to you, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.